The sun beats down on a dusty backroad in Georgia. A 74-year-old woman, Margaret Whitmore, sits in her car, stranded, alone, and uncertain. Her tire is flat. Her phone has no signal. As she watches a young black girl approach, Margaret's first instinct is fear. She locks the door. A quiet moment that reveals how deep prejudice can run. But Alana Carter, just 15, isn't what Margaret expects. She offers help, not for money but out of kindness. Her hands work with precision, her heart without hesitation. And in that simple act, everything changes. What happens when a moment of fear gives way to the power of kindness and transforms both lives in the process? The Georgia sun was relentless that afternoon, low, blinding, and heavy with heat. At 74, Margaret Whitmore had seen her share of discomfort in life, but this was downright irritating. She sat alone in her silver Cadillac Escalade, parked awkwardly on the side of a narrow backroad, surrounded by nothing but pine trees and distant cicadas. Her air conditioner struggled to keep up as she fanned herself with the edge of an old magazine. The digital dashboard blinked a red warning: low tire pressure, rear left. "Perfect," she muttered, slipping off her sunglasses. "Just perfect." She reached for her phone, no signal. She raised it higher, almost willing a single bar to appear. Nothing. "Of course," she sighed. Dead center of nowhere. That's when she saw the silhouette. A figure, walking alone along the road, small, lean, maybe a teen. As the figure grew closer, Margaret squinted. It was a young black girl, probably 14 or 15, wearing a threadbare t-shirt and dusty sneakers. Her afro puffed out gently in the wind, and her steps were confident, unhurried. Without thinking, Margaret pressed the lock button on her car door. The soft click echoed louder than expected. The girl didn't flinch. She walked right up to the passenger side and tapped gently on the window. "You okay, ma'am?" she asked through the glass. Margaret hesitated, lowering it just a few inches. "Flat tire," she said tersely. "I'm waiting on help." The girl nodded, calm. "Ain't no service out here. You got a spare?" Margaret blinked. "Yes, but I wouldn't expect." "I can help if you don't mind," the girl offered, pointing to the trunk. "My uncle showed me how." Margaret studied her. Polite, steady voice. Not a trace of threat. And yet, the years of warnings, of instincts she'd inherited from a different time, they all screamed, "Be careful." But something else whispered, "Let her help." "All right," Margaret finally said, unlocking the trunk. "It's in there." And just like that, everything began to change. The trunk popped open with a quiet thunk, and the girl didn't waste a second. She rounded the back of the Escalade with the ease of someone who knew her way around a job like this. Margaret remained seated for a moment, debating whether to get out or just watch from the safety of her air-conditioned bubble. Eventually, guilt and curiosity nudged her door open. The gravel crunched beneath her loafers as she stepped out, shielding her eyes from the sun. The girl had already pulled out the jack and lug wrench, her hands moving with surprising efficiency. "You sure you know what you're doing?" Margaret asked, arms crossed. The girl looked up briefly, not offended, just focused. "Yes, ma'am. Changed my aunt's tire last month. Hers was worse than this." Margaret didn't know what to say to that. She watched as the girl loosened the lug nuts one by one, her slender arms steady with pressure. There was something about the way she worked. No wasted motion, no hesitation. "What's your name?" Margaret asked, the question almost catching in her throat. "Alana," the girl replied without looking up. "Alana Carter." "Well, I'm Margaret," she said, unsure why she felt the need to offer it. Alana gave her a quick glance and a polite nod. "Nice to meet you, Miss Margaret." There was no sarcasm in her tone, just quiet courtesy. The minutes ticked by slowly. The occasional breeze offered some mercy, but the heat still clung to everything. Margaret dabbed at her forehead with a tissue while Alana worked in silence. "You know," Margaret said, trying to sound casual, "most kids your age wouldn't even look twice at someone stuck on the road." Alana tightened the spare and stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. "My mama says, if you can help, you should." That's just how we were raised. Something about the way she said it, simple, sincere, made Margaret's throat tighten. She felt something unfamiliar. Admiration? Shame? Both? "Well," she said, reaching into her purse, "I'd like to give you something. For your time." She pulled out a folded 20, holding it out. But Alana shook her head. "No thank you, ma'am. I don't do this for money." Margaret hesitated, arms still extended. "I mean it," Alana said softly. "Glad you're safe. That's enough." And just like that, she turned and started walking back the way she came, her figure shrinking in the shimmering heat. Margaret stood alone by her car, hands still holding the $20 bill, unsure what stunned her more, the kindness or the refusal. She slipped the money back into her purse. For a long moment, she watched the road where Alana had disappeared. Then she got into the driver's seat, shut the door, and sat there, engine humming. Something inside her had shifted, but she couldn't quite name it yet. All she knew was that this wasn't the end of it, not by a long shot. By the time Margaret pulled into her driveway, the sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees, casting a soft amber light across the ivy-covered front of her home. The automatic gates closed behind her with their usual mechanical certainty, but for once, they felt less like protection, and more like a barrier. She parked, turned off the engine, and just sat. The silence in the car was heavy. Her mind kept returning to Alana Carter, the way her hands had moved with quiet assurance, the way she'd said, "That's just how we were raised." The way she'd walked away without asking for a single thing, leaving only a faint trail of dust and something Margaret couldn't quite name. Dignity, maybe. Inside, the air was cool, the floor spotless, and everything in its place. She passed by the antique mirror in the entryway and barely recognized the expression on her own face, drawn, unsettled. She poured herself a glass of red wine, then set it down untouched on the counter. Later, in the den, she sat in her favorite chair, the leather one near the fireplace, her feet tucked under a blanket she suddenly didn't need. On the table beside her, the latest issue of Southern Living lay unread, its glossy cover catching the last of the evening light. "Why couldn't I just say thank you?" she whispered aloud. The words hung in the room like dust motes. Images from her childhood surfaced, her father lowering the radio when a black family walked past their car, her grandmother clutching her purse in elevators, neighbors whispering warnings about the wrong side of town. She hadn't thought about those things in years, hadn't needed to. Life had kept her in circles where those questions never came up. But now, here was this girl. No resentment, no chip on her shoulder. Just decency. Margaret stared out the window, watching dusk settle over her manicured lawn. She had been helped, not just with a tire, but with a mirror held up to her spirit. And she realized, with a quiet shiver, that she couldn't let it end there. Something had begun on that dusty roadside, and Margaret Whitmore wasn't ready to walk away from it. Not yet. The next morning, Margaret woke earlier than usual. The house was quiet, as always, but something inside her was louder than it had been in years. A tug, a pull she couldn't explain away. Her routine felt hollow. Even her usual crossword puzzle didn't hold her attention. She stood at the kitchen window, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring out at the neatly trimmed hedges. Then, without fully knowing why, she grabbed her purse, keys, and a notepad from the drawer and walked out the door. "Let's see if I can find you, Alana Carter," she murmured to herself. She drove back to that same winding country road, hoping for a glimpse, a clue, anything. But the road was empty. She pulled into a gas station a few miles down, a dusty old place with rusted pumps and a flickering open sign. Inside, an older man behind the counter glanced up from a racing form. "Excuse me," Margaret said, approaching cautiously. "I'm looking for a young girl, maybe 14 or 15, black, slim build, big curly hair. Her name's Alana. Helped me with a flat tire yesterday." The man blinked. "Can't say I know her. Lots of kids around here." Margaret nodded politely, thanked him, and headed back out. She tried 2 more places, a diner and a bait shop, each time repeating her quiet inquiry. Shrugs, blank stares, and "haven't seen her" were all she got in return. She was about to give up when she walked into a small roadside cafe. It smelled like bacon grease and biscuits. Behind the counter stood a black woman in her 60s, wiping down a tray with slow, practiced hands. "You're not from around here," the woman said, eyeing Margaret gently. "No, ma'am," Margaret replied. "I'm looking for someone." After a beat, she described Alana again. The woman smiled softly. "Sounds like you met one of our brightest. That'd be Alana Carter. Lives with her mama over on the east side, near Peachtree and Vine." Margaret scribbled the address. "Thank you. Truly." The woman leaned in slightly. "She helps everybody, but most folks never bother to come back. Good on you for trying." Margaret swallowed hard. "I'm not just trying," she said quietly. "I need to." And with that, she headed back to her car, a sense of urgency tightening around her chest. It took Margaret less than 20 minutes to find the east side neighborhood once she left the cafe, though it felt like she'd crossed more than just town lines. As she drove deeper in, the manicured lawns and brick mailboxes of her world gave way to cracked sidewalks, leaning fences, and children playing barefoot in front yards strewn with bikes and basketballs. She slowed in front of a small, weathered duplex with peeling paint and a porch that sagged in the middle like a tired old back. There were potted plants on the steps, despite the broken railing, evidence, Margaret thought, of someone who still tried to make things beautiful. She hesitated. This wasn't a place she would have ever come to on her own. But she wasn't the same woman she'd been yesterday. Taking a breath, she stepped out of the car and approached the front door. A moment passed after she knocked before it opened to reveal a woman in navy scrubs, her hair pulled into a bun, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, cautious. Margaret adjusted the strap on her purse. "I'm looking for Alana. She helped me yesterday, changed my tire, wouldn't take a dime. I needed to thank her. Properly." The woman's expression softened immediately. "That sounds like my girl." She stepped aside. "Come on in. I'm Alana Carter, her mom." Margaret entered slowly. The inside of the house was small but tidy. Family photos lined the hallway, birthday parties, school plays, church Sundays. There were scuffs on the floor and mismatched chairs around the kitchen table. But there was also warmth, real warmth, that Margaret hadn't felt in years. "She's out back," Letitia said, leading her through to the screen door. Through the mesh, Margaret could see Alana, crouched beside an old wooden push mower, examining the blade with a wrench in hand. "Alana," Letitia called gently, "you've got a visitor." The girl looked up, surprised. When she saw Margaret, she smiled, modestly but genuinely. "Hey, Miss Margaret," she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Everything all right with your car?" Margaret stepped closer, unsure why she suddenly felt nervous. "Yes, thanks to you. But I couldn't stop thinking about you, about what you did. I just wanted to say thank you. Face to face." Alana shrugged, easy and light. "Wasn't a big deal." "It was to me," Margaret replied, voice soft. "More than you know." Letitia watched them quietly from the doorway, eyes glinting with something between pride and curiosity. Two women, two generations, two very different worlds, had just collided. But for the first time in a long time, Margaret didn't feel out of place. She felt like she'd finally stepped into something real. Alana stood, brushing grass from her knees and setting the wrench on the porch step. Margaret watched her, unsure what to say now that she was face to face again. The girl's calmness hadn't changed, but now it felt deeper, like she belonged to a world that didn't need approval, just purpose. Margaret cleared her throat. "I wanted to thank you again. You helped me when I really needed it, and I haven't stopped thinking about it." Alana tilted her head slightly, still smiling. "It really wasn't a big deal, Miss Margaret. I was just in the right place at the right time." Margaret shook her head. "No, it was more than that." She hesitated, then glanced around the yard. The grass was patchy, the fence held together with mismatched boards, and an old swing set leaned tiredly in the corner. But none of it looked neglected, just worn from honest use. "I don't think you realize how rare that kind of kindness is these days," Margaret said, her voice quieter now. "Helping someone you don't know, expecting nothing in return." Alana looked down, towing a bit of loose gravel with her shoe. "I guess I just don't see it like that. My mom says if you can help, you help. Simple as that." Margaret nodded slowly, the words settling into her chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The breeze moved through the yard like a whisper, and Margaret felt strangely exposed. This girl, barely a teenager, had shaken something loose in her that decades of success and comfort never touched. "I want to do something for you and your family," Margaret said finally, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. Alana straightened, her smile fading slightly. "That's kind, but we're okay. Really. We get by." Margaret took a breath, then looked her in the eye. "It's not about need. It's about what's right." From the porch, Letitia called, "Alana, wash up before lunch." Then, turning to Margaret, she added with a soft smile, "You're welcome to join us. It's nothing fancy, but we've got plenty." Margaret blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't been invited into someone's kitchen in years. Not like this, not with warmth that didn't expect anything in return. "I'd like that," she said, her voice catching. Alana held the screen door open, still barefoot and smiling again. Margaret stepped inside, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was walking towards something that mattered. Inside the Carter kitchen, the smell of roasted vegetables and freshly baked cornbread filled the air. The space was small, a little cramped, but full of life. The table, though scratched and uneven, had been lovingly set, 3 mismatched plates, a chipped ceramic pitcher filled with sweet tea, and a steaming dish of buttered okra in the center. Margaret sat across from Letitia, who wore a faded apron over her scrubs, and beside Alana, who had finally rinsed the dirt from her hands and slipped into a clean t-shirt. There was laughter in the air, light conversation about school and weekend chores, but beneath it all, Margaret sensed something deeper, something unspoken. Halfway through the meal, she set down her fork and cleared her throat. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," she began slowly, "but you've raised quite an extraordinary daughter." Letitia's eyes softened. "Thank you," she said, wiping her hands on a napkin. "She makes it easy." "I doubt it's been easy," Margaret said gently. "Not with everything the world throws at you." Letitia tilted her head. "Well, no, it hasn't been. But we manage. We stick together, and we hold tight to what's ours." Margaret leaned back slightly, searching for the right words. "Yesterday, when Alana offered to help me, I'll be honest, I was scared at first. And that's not something I'm proud of." Letitia nodded slowly, as if she'd heard this before. "Most people are." Alana looked up, her expression unreadable. Margaret continued, her voice steady. "I realized, I've spent most of my life surrounded by people who look like me, think like me. And that doesn't excuse anything. But it explains a lot." Letitia's tone was calm, but pointed. "You saw a black girl walking toward your car on a country road, and your instinct was to lock the doors. That instinct, that's the part we live with every day." Margaret felt the sting of truth in those words. "I didn't even know it was there," she admitted, "until she changed my tire, and changed me." Silence fell over the table, not heavy but thoughtful. Letitia leaned in, her voice lower. "We don't need saving, Margaret. What we need is to be seen. To be treated with the same dignity and trust everyone else gets without question." Margaret nodded, humbled. "I see that now," she said. "And I want to do better. Not out of guilt. Out of gratitude." Across the table, Alana smiled, small but bright. The meal resumed, the conversation gentler now, the walls between them thinner. In that kitchen, something real had been exchanged. Not charity, not pity, understanding. As the plates were cleared and the last crumbs of cornbread wiped from the table, Margaret found herself lingering in her seat, reluctant to leave the comfort of that modest kitchen. There was something grounding about the space, something she hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Letitia stacked the dishes gently in the sink, humming a soft gospel tune. Alana excused herself to the backyard, already drawn back to the half-fixed mower she'd abandoned earlier. Through the screen door, Margaret could see her crouched again, screwdriver in hand, brow furrowed in focus. Letitia returned to the table and sat across from Margaret once more, drying her hands with a towel. "I know that look," she said softly. Margaret blinked. "What look?" "The one where you're still sitting here, hours later, trying to figure out what to do with the weight in your chest." Margaret exhaled, a slow breath she hadn't even realized she'd been holding. "It's like something's been shaken loose. I thought I understood the world. But now, I'm not so sure." Letitia nodded. "That's how real change starts. It messes with your balance. Makes you see what you never wanted to." Margaret leaned forward. "I want to do something. Not just say thank you. I want to show it." Letitia's smile was gentle but firm. "Before you do anything, ask yourself who it's really for." Margaret didn't answer right away. Her fingers tapped lightly on the rim of her teacup. "I used to think giving meant writing a check," she said finally. "But this feels different. I want to show up. Like Alana did for me." Letitia's expression softened. "Then start there." Outside, Alana had finished reassembling the mower. She stood and gave the cord a tug. It sputtered once, then roared to life. Her grin lit up the whole yard. Margaret stepped to the door, watching her. "She's something else," she murmured. "She's got more grit than most folks twice her age," Letitia replied proudly. "And she's got dreams, too. Big ones." Margaret turned back, eyes full of something new, conviction. "Then I want to help build something around those dreams. Not as a favor, as an investment. In her. In this family." Letitia studied her for a long moment. "You sure this isn't about easing your own guilt?" Margaret didn't flinch. "No. It's about doing the right thing. Even if I'm late to the party." Letitia gave a slow nod. "Then you're welcome to stay a while." And with that, the line between stranger and friend quietly faded. The next morning, Margaret sat at her kitchen table, pen in hand, her coffee long since gone cold. The notepad in front of her was covered in lists, names of contractors, donation contacts, community outreach centers. Her handwriting, once sharp and orderly, now wavered slightly with urgency. She wasn't doing this for show. She wasn't doing it to soothe her conscience. She was doing it because, for the first time in a long while, she'd been given something she hadn't known she needed: perspective. By midweek, her calls had turned into action. The first crew arrived on a Thursday morning, 2 pickup trucks with ladders, power tools, and 3 workers Margaret had known from a renovation project years ago. She stood outside the Carters' home in slacks and sensible shoes, clipboard in hand. Letitia stepped onto the porch, eyebrows raised. "Margaret, what is all this?" Margaret smiled, nervous but certain. "We're getting started. You mentioned the roof leaks when it rains. That ends today." Letitia stared at the trucks, the men unloading plywood and shingles, and then looked back at Margaret. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice catching. "I know," Margaret said softly. "But I wanted to. And not just the roof. That fence in the back, the wiring, the old swing set. Let's make this place match the strength that already lives in it." Letitia blinked hard, nodding slowly. "You mean it?" "I do." Alana watched from the sidewalk, eyes wide with wonder. "Is this really happening?" Margaret turned to her. "This is happening because you showed up when I needed it. Now it's my turn." In the days that followed, Margaret returned again and again. Not just to write checks or direct the workers, but to be present. She brought sandwiches and iced tea. She asked questions. She listened. One afternoon, she found Alana kneeling beside one of the workers, Joe, a gruff but kind-eyed carpenter, watching him measure planks. "You interested in learning this stuff?" he asked her. Alana nodded eagerly. "Yeah, I like knowing how things fit together." Joe smiled. "Then grab that tape measure. Let's get you started." From a few steps back, Margaret watched the scene unfold with a warmth she couldn't explain. It was more than repair work. It was rebuilding something bigger. In her heart, she knew, this wasn't a favor. This was redemption. One nail, one board, one afternoon at a time. And it was just the beginning. It had taken just under 3 weeks, but the transformation was undeniable. The once faded home now stood tall and dignified, fresh white paint, a new shingled roof, a porch that no longer sagged under its own weight. In the backyard, a brand new swing set gleamed in the sun, its chains glinting silver, ready for laughter and flight. Neighbors gathered that afternoon, some with cornbread, others with mason jars of homemade jam. Children ran through the yard while adults leaned on the fence, marveling at the change. But the real shift hadn't been in the wood and nails. It was in the way people looked at each other. Margaret stood on the front porch, a cold glass of sweet tea in her hand, her slacks dusted from the morning's cleanup. She wasn't a guest anymore. She was part of something, and she felt it deep in her bones. Letitia joined her, brushing flour from her apron. "You've done more than fix a house," she said, her voice thick. "You gave us hope again." Margaret looked out at the yard, her voice steady. "You gave it to me first. I just returned it." Just then, Alana bounded up the steps, her cheeks flushed, hair wild from playing. "Miss Margaret," she said, eyes bright, "I've been thinking, when I grow up, I want to help people too. Like this. Fix things. Build stuff. Make things better." Margaret knelt slightly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You already are, sweetheart. You helped me remember what matters." They stood there, the 3 of them, generations apart, lives once strangers, now bound by something stronger than circumstance. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops and laughter filled the air, Margaret felt something she hadn't in decades: joy. Not the fleeting kind that came from vacations or bank accounts, but the kind rooted in purpose, in people, and most of all, in love freely given, without asking for anything in return. That night, long after the neighbors had gone home and the laughter faded into crickets, Margaret remained on the Carter family porch. The air was thick with summer warmth, and the hum of cicadas created a kind of lullaby that reminded her of her childhood, before ambition, before walls. She held a second glass of tea in her lap, ice nearly melted, and watched Alana through the screen door. The girl was seated at the kitchen table, flipping through a catalog of trade schools Margaret had quietly brought by earlier in the week. Her brow furrowed in concentration, her finger tracing along a photo of a welding class. "She really could go far," Margaret said softly. Letitia, who sat beside her in a rocking chair, nodded without looking up. "She will. She just needed someone to believe it out loud." Margaret smiled faintly, her gaze steady on the girl inside. "I spent years chasing things I thought mattered. Titles, property, invitations to parties where no one really knew each other. And then a young girl with dusty sneakers and a wrench reminded me what really matters." Letitia glanced sideways, her voice quiet. "Most people don't come back after the tire gets changed. I almost didn't, Margaret admitted. It would have been easier not to. But something about Alana, about both of you, pulled me back. A pause settled between them, not heavy but sacred. Margaret looked up at the stars beginning to emerge beyond the roofline. You know, she said, almost to herself, I used to think I was nearing the end of the road. 74. Widowed. Retired. Alone in a big house full of antiques and silence. Letitia's voice was gentle. And now? Margaret turned, her voice full of certainty. Now I think maybe I've just started living. Inside, Alana looked up and caught their eyes. She waved, her smile sleepy but sure. And in that quiet exchange, through the screen door and across generations, Margaret felt something settle in her chest. Not closure, not an ending, but a beginning. As Margaret prepared to leave, the porch light cast a soft glow over the front steps. Alana came out to say goodbye, her curls still damp from a quick shower, a small towel draped around her neck. You sure you don't want to stay for cobbler? Letitia called from the kitchen. Margaret chuckled. If I stay any longer, you'll never get rid of me. Alana hugged her tight, no hesitation, no ceremony. Just warmth. Thank you, she said, for believing in me. Margaret rested her hands on the girl's shoulders. You did the hard part, Alana. You believed in yourself first. I just caught up. She walked down the steps slowly, the evening air soft around her. Reaching her car, she looked back one last time. At the house, the swing set, the open door that no longer felt like a stranger's. She didn't see poverty or struggle anymore. She saw strength, joy, possibility. Funny, she whispered to herself, slipping into the driver's seat. I thought I was the one doing the helping. She paused, hand on the ignition. But it turns out, I was the one who got saved. As the car pulled away into the quiet night, the porch light remained on, glowing like a promise. It's not what you give, it's how you show up. There's something about growing older that brings a certain stillness. A quieter home, fewer names on the calendar, more time to think about choices, regrets, and the things we should have done differently. Margaret Whitmore had everything a person might envy. Wealth, comfort, a name that still opened doors. But all that meant nothing when her car broke down on a back road, and the silence inside her was louder than ever. What changed everything wasn't the flat tire. It wasn't even the help. It was who showed up. A young black girl named Alana Carter, maybe 15, with dusty sneakers, calloused hands, and a heart steady as her wrench. She asked for nothing, offered everything, and disappeared with the same quiet grace she came in with. That moment peeled something open in Margaret, something she didn't even know had grown calloused over time. She had locked her door out of habit, fear she'd never voiced but always obeyed. It wasn't hatred. It was something worse, assumption. The kind that sits in a person unnoticed for decades, passed down like silverware. Comfortable, polished, dangerous. But Alana didn't flinch at Margaret's fear. She just kept showing up, first for a stranger on the roadside, then later for the workers repairing her home, watching, learning, offering her hands where they were needed. And Margaret? She learned that redemption doesn't come from grand gestures or checkbooks. It comes from presence, from listening, from humbling yourself enough to admit you've been wrong, and then doing the slow, faithful work to make it right. The lesson is simple, but not easy. We don't heal this world with money. We heal it with courage. The courage to see people fully. The courage to admit when we've been blind. And the courage to return, not just once, but over and over, until trust grows in the soil we once ignored. In the end, Margaret didn't just fix a porch or replace a swing set. She reclaimed a piece of herself she'd forgotten. The girl who once believed people were worth knowing before judging. And Alana, she reminded every person watching that the smallest act of kindness, done without ego, without expectation, can change a life. Sometimes two. So if there's anything to take away from this story, it's this. It's never too late to learn, never too late to listen, and never too late to show up. Because sometimes the person you thought you were helping is the one who helped you come home to yourself. What would you have done in Margaret's shoes that day on the road? Have you ever judged someone too quickly, only to be humbled by their kindness? Or maybe you were the person who showed up when no one expected it. Share your story in the comments, and let's talk about how simple actions can change lives in the most unexpected ways.